Hi there, my name's Dave Groom and I'm a landscape artist who lives on the edge of Lamington National Park at Beachmont, and I'm having the show Surreal Nature at the Tweed Regional Gallery, and I'm here to talk about my work. Apologies for sitting down, I had a little accident a couple of weeks ago, so I'm on crutches, so that's the reason I'm relaxing. So this is Endless Falls, which is a painting that I did about 3 months ago. It was after a period of rain that we had in January and February, and having gone through a period of fairly heavy fires in September, I guess I was really enjoying that whole process of seeing the rain come and see the waterfalls flow again. And there's quite a few waterfalls in Lamington that only flow for a short period of time. And that's, I guess, what I was looking at with this painting, with these wispy falls that suddenly appear out of these slim gorges and little narrow crevices in the rainforest, and remembering that, you know, even though we have these periods of really intense droughts and so on, we still live in a subtropical rainforest area, so the rain does eventually come. So it was a very nice piece to work on. I guess it was a little bit of a healing piece to work on after we'd had the fires. Like all my work, the paintings in this exhibition come from study drawings. So I do charcoal drawings to begin with. The drawings are generally quite a bit smaller, and then when I go to the painting stage, I enlarge the canvas and do a bigger version. The nice thing about working from a drawing is that in the drawing you're just dealing with line and tone, so that you've basically got a good template to start with, a good structure to start with, and then it's a matter of deciding on the colours and basically increasing the size when it comes to the painting. I guess one of the nice things about the way I work is that because I start with drawings and it's just line and tone, is that I'm dealing with texture and the patterns of the landscape, and that's something that I like to play around with, especially in this more surreal style. I suppose I have two different styles: a more traditional viewpoint, you know, your classic kind of landscapes viewpoint, and this more surreal style. But I enjoy working in this way because there's a lot of freedom in the way you work, and you can really think about the textures and the atmospheres and so on in the work. So I'll talk a little bit about my drawings in another section of this video, but a lot of that texture and line and pattern comes about in the drawing process, and then it's a matter of putting that into the painting. So a lot of this foreground area, you know, anyone who's been into the rainforest will have this sense of what the rainforest is like, and it's quite textural and deep and dense, and it's something that can be quite daunting to portray if you're trying to paint it or draw it, especially when you're in deep rainforest. So this is a nice way to deal with it, is just to take individual elements of what you see and put them in a work and create an energy within that rather than a literal interpretation of what you see. So there's elements in here: epiphytes, stag horns, elk horns, palm trees, the sort of things that you walk past when you're going on a walk through the forest. So it's for me, the challenge is combining those elements to create a sense of a viewpoint that you kind of recognise, but at the same time you're looking at certain things and thinking, oh, what is that exactly? And that's something I like about it too, because with more slightly abstract elements, some people will see certain things and other people will see something else. Some people might think, oh, that's a mushroom, and someone else will think, oh, that's a root of a tree. So, and that's a nice thing in that it's up to the individual to interpret what they see. Probably something that's even more of a nice thing in the drawings, because there's no colour, so you're just seeing these patterns and textures. So it depends on your experience with the rainforest and the landscape as to what kind of elements you might actually see in the forest. Another thing that I really enjoy is that sense of depth, and where we live on the top of a ridge, so we get to look down into a valley, and you get that real sense of distance, and it's a very typical thing of Australia, that real crisp light that you have, and that when you've got that sense of distance, you often have a lot of different tones of blue depending on the time of day and the atmosphere and so on. So I really like playing around with the blue tones for distance, and this is a good painting to talk about that. those real cool blues for the distant hills, and then you can build warmth in the blues to create that sense that you're coming closer and moving further forward, and then all of the organic elements in the foreground are much warmer colours, and that's just a simple technique of using cool colours to create that sense of distance and warmer colours for more detailed foreground. So this is another painting from the Summer Dream series, which is connected to the big painting that we were talking about earlier. This one's called the 3 Cascades, and you can see 3 waterfalls that are featured in this work. Once again, another piece that I did during that January-February period when the rain came, and that real sense of what it's like to be in the rainforest when it's wet and misty. And one of the interesting things is at the moment the national park is closed because of the fires. They still haven't opened up the road, so there's all these people who are passionate to get back into the park, and I'm one of them, and sort of living on the edge of it. We can't actually walk in the park at the moment, which is really frustrating, but it's been a nice process for me to just imagine what it would be like to be in the park, and that's where these more lush pieces have come from, because we haven't had a chance to physically get out there. So that's a nice thing about being a painter who works from imagination, is you can create that view and a sense of being in the forest. A lot of the work I do, especially this sort of more surreal style, is based off memory. So it's just purely memory. I just start with the drawings and I don't use photo reference or anything. I just start drawing lines and patterns on the paper and think about a particular place or a particular time. With this painting, I thought very much about the Coomera circuit, which is one of the better known walks in the park. And there's a series of cascades that run through, it's like a little narrow slot canyon. So I wanted to get that sense of being in these fairly narrow gorges and kind of making your way through the dense forest and discovering these pools. The black cockatoos are something that I'll feature in the work. We've got both the yellowtail and the red-tailed cockatoos in our area, and it's sort of myth, but at the same time it always seems real that cockatoos come when it's raining. And just the other day there was this misty rain and there were the black cockatoos. We didn't see them, but we heard them. So I often include them in work that has anything to do with mist and rain, because they do seem to be there. I often play around with that sense of, you're almost falling off the side of a hill, and you'll get those points where you're walking along and that there'll be a canyon or something, and you actually look down, and if it's a misty day, that you can't actually see the bottom. That's the sort of thing you'll see. You'll see the foreground forest and the textures, and then there's this misty distant view, and it might be a valley, it might be the sky. Even when you're in the landscape, you can almost get a little bit disorientated. So that's a fun thing to play around with. My wife always jokes that when we go for a walk, if it's off track, I'll say, let's just go around the corner and, see what's there. And I guess little elements like that come out with gorges where you're rock hopping up a gorge and you've come to a nice pool and you think, this is nice, but maybe there's a nicer one around the corner. So they're nice things to think about when you're working as well. Balance is an interesting thing too, and usually with the drawings I'll stick very closely to what's in the drawing when I go to the painting stage, but I'll sometimes add something in the painting just to create that balance, and that can be really simple, and often I'll use the birds to create balance. So if there's a sense that everything's maybe moving a little bit too far in one direction, by putting birds or moon is another thing that I use, you can then bring the eye back up to an area that maybe you feel as though needs a little bit of balance. So as much as I'll usually stick pretty close to the drawing, taking it to the painting stage, I will make certain changes, and they're the sort of changes that can make quite a big difference to the final piece. So this work is called Ghosts Under the Canopy, and it was one of the earlier works I did, and like most of the paintings there's a drawing version of it. And I actually thought about Gondwanaland and how Africa and Australia and Antarctic was all one continent, and we would have had this period where there were these animals that were all fairly similar roaming around one continent, and then it split up and we all became separate, but there's still these similarities. And I was thinking about sort of the different animals that we've had overall, and what we still have, and what we've lost, and that made me kind of think about that whole sense of, you know, ghosts of animals that have been and that we currently have. So there's all sorts of strange things going on here. It'd be interesting to compare this with the drawing, because the drawing, a lot of the shapes weren't that defined, but they became a little bit more defined in this piece. There's elements like there's like an elephant in that top right corner, which kind of represents the connection with Africa, and, you know, maybe Australia once had kind of elephants. Who knows? And there's other elements like this area here, sort of a hint of a Tasmanian tiger, and there's an echidna-like shape underneath it. This organic thing here, it's sort of almost like a salamander, or almost like something that's kind of evolving. And, you know, I was thinking about that too, is that everything is always evolving, and we always have these different elements in nature. So it became this sort of fascinating conglomerate of creatures and textures and patterns. But I kind of had this sense that overall, you know, they've evolved and been protected by the canopy of the landscape, and that, you know, things sort of come and go, but the landscape is always here. So it was a very free piece to work on, and the things I like about working on pieces like this is that they do become quite dreamy and surreal, but you've got to let yourself go with that. You can't get too bogged down in, you know, why you're doing it or what's going on in the painting. It's more about being inspired by the work, and if elephants and strange salamander creatures turn up, then that's the way it is. So yeah, it was a really fun piece to work on, and probably one of my favourite pieces as far as colour goes. Once again, there's that real sense of depth, and then coming into the foreground with the warmer colours. I use quite a lot of dark blues, ultramarine blue and purples in my background areas, although that often is more of a mid-ground thing, so those colours you can really see in this sort of mid-ground area. And you can get that real richness in both colour and texture by having those really dark blue, purpley shades in the background, and then bringing those more organic elements forward. One of the great things about eucalypts is that they have those beautiful creamy pink apricot kind of warm colours, so I always really enjoy working on eucalypt trees and the bark and the textures of the eucalypts, and they can create a real sense of dimension by having those in the foreground. Then you've kind of got these layers one after the other. Now this piece also features a spangled drongo, the bird up here, which we see different times of year. It's a migratory bird that comes from Indonesia, one of my favourite birds. It's got a beautiful kind of rich green translucent colour on its wing, and a really nice call too, so you'll often hear them before you see them. And I just love the name, Spangled Drongo. You can't go wrong with that. So this is a bit of a different painting. It's still in very much that surreal style, but it's one of my pod paintings, and I've been doing pod paintings probably since the mid-2000s, or 2005, I think it was when I first started doing pod series. And I've never quite defined what the pods are about, but they're kind of inspired by epiphytes, which are staghorns, elkhorns, those sort of things. And a lot of epiphytes, when they reproduce, they have spores, and the spores are just released into the atmosphere, and the spores kind of float from the original plant and embed themselves onto a tree or a rock, and then germinate and become another epiphyte. So I kind of like that idea of these forms that almost have wings. You know, you've got these beautiful shapes which are common in crow's nests and staghorns and elkhorns, and to me they're quite wing-like. So I like this idea of having this epiphyte-like form that almost germinates on the wing and floats off into a whole new world. Generally they're quite hopeful pieces. There's one pod work in this show that's a little bit darker, in that it's kind of it's like a struggling pod. It's just surviving the fire. But this piece is very much a positive piece, and it features that lovely mist that you get after rain. I wanted the colours to be really warm, as though it's either morning or afternoon light, and there's that kind of slight misty haziness in the air that you get after rain. And I wanted to create a sense of life continuing, and that feeling that even though we do have droughts and periods of harshness in the landscape, nature itself is actually a very strong thing, and it's been quite humbling to see the change in the landscape over the last year and how we went through that period of dry and seeing the landscape come back. So this piece was very much a celebration of that. I'll often incorporate little elements in the pod work, like these seeds, ready to germinate, ready to kind of move on, and these kind of tendril-like shapes, which are, sort of have that sense of fertility and growth to them. And maybe there's something that sort of search, the tendrils are searching for something to grab onto, so that they can then support the pod in its future endeavours, whatever they may be. But they're fun pieces to work with, and it's nice playing around with that sense of a floating landscape that's quite transient and can move about. Once again, that whole sense of balance is something that's really important, and the last thing that came into this painting was the little black cockatoo down in the right hand corner. And again, because I like that sense of cockatoos and rain and that connection, but it also brings the eye back down and around through the work. Possibly without the bird there, you'd be sort of up in this top left hand corner a little bit, but yeah, they're fun little things you can play around with late in the process of creating, because you just want to create the work so that it's got a nice balance. So this work is called Tadpole Pool, and I guess it's a little bit of a mixture of everything. It's got elements of the fires from September and October up in the top area there. We had a fire that swept from a place called Sarabah across the valley, and the embers actually started the fire hundreds of metres in front of the fire front because the wind was blowing so hard. So I've got these strong memories of this smoke sweeping through and then setting alight other areas of the park. But it was also a painting of hope, because even though there were areas that were burning, there was a lot of the rainforest was fine. Most of the rainforest was fine. It didn't burn, and life goes on. And tadpoles have always been something that fascinate me. I remember as a kid sort of going to the local pools and looking for tadpoles and catching tadpoles, and that wonderful discovery as a child. If you go to this crystal clear pool and you can see all these little tadpoles swimming around. So I call this Tadpole Pool, and you can just see a little hint of a pool tucked away down here, almost held up by a leaf of an epiphyte. The left hand side is a little bit more surreal and organic and kind of strange life form, and this section here reminded me a little bit of a tadpole, so I kind of kept it as like an element that had that feel of a tadpole, maybe kind of trying to make its way towards the pool. But yeah, they're some of the ideas that kind of go through my strange brain every now and then, and you've just got to get them out there and enjoy the process. Speaking of which, I hope you've enjoyed me talking about my work, and I hope you get a chance to see the show. For me, it's a great honour to have a show at the Tweed Gallery, so I look forward to seeing how it all goes, and we might see you there and enjoy.